Welcome back, and we're now ready to fill out your very own personalized pattern based on your gauge. You will need a copy of the pattern printed out, a copy of the gauge record sheet that has already been filled out with your actual gauge that you have calculated and measured based on your proper gauge swatch. A calculator, though really you can do all of this by hand. It's just that the calculator is really fast, and I want to show you how to use the memory on your calculator, which is a very clever little thing. And I suggest a pencil with an eraser, because as we go along, we'll probably be adjusting things, and it keeps it kind of neater if we can erase stuff rather than crossing it out all the time. So let's get started. Here I am with my gauge record sheet. This is the name of my yarn, its fiber content, how many skeins I had. I actually had to look it up online because I couldn't find the ball band, and it's roughly about 210 yards per 100 grams. I also found the recommended gauge online, which is 4.5 stitches and 6 rows per inch. The recommended needles are 8 and 6. Why does this become important information? Well, as you get more experience, it's very nice to have this because it allows you to guess what the best needles are going to be for you to use, or it just helps you in your experience. Okay, I am using number 7 beige plastic needles and number 6 orange metal ones, that's what that says, for my gauge. My stitches were 4.28 stitches per inch, and my rows were 6.15. Now, my stitch gauge widened with washing, but the row gauge stayed the same, and that's an important piece of information too, because I can knit just by measuring rather than having to count rows. Okay, so now I want to fill out my pattern, and I've already started this. It's a drop shoulder long sleeve polo. I started it on the 29th of January. It's for class rather than a person. It's a child size 1, and I'm using my Brunette pale blue acrylic. I have about 300 grams. I had 3 balls that I got, and I'm going to be using about 450 yards. Over here is an area for body measurements, but we aren't using body measurements in this class. We are just using the standards that we took out of Sweater 101. I again repeat the needles that I have, and this is the important piece, my gauge, stitches and rows per inch. Now, in Sweater 101, usually there are no measurements on here. They are just blank, and you have to fill in your own measurements depending on the size you're going to make. But I created this pattern so that it would have the measurements. So it's going to be 11 inches wide. It's going to be 22 inches all the way around. This is just the standard stuff. It's a little bit big for a child size 1, but like I said, they grow in a hurry. So how are we going to use our handy dandy calculator to help us fill in this information? First of all, this is old and simple, and it has some buttons on it that are probably similar to yours. Let's start by talking about the memory on a calculator, on a simple one like this. You can put one number into the memory of your calculator, and when you need to call it up, you go MRC, memory recall, and it will tell you, it will pull that up, and then you can use it. M minus means to subtract from memory. M plus means to add from memory. Some more sophisticated calculators also have MC or CM for clear the memory, or memory clear. Mine is very simple. I just add something into memory, and when I want to get it out, I subtract it out of memory. In this case, the important number that I have is my stitch gauge, and that is 4.28. So I want to add that to memory. Let me go on. 4.28 added to memory, and then I'm going to clear. Now notice it gives me a 0, but I have a little m there, and that tells me that there's a number in my memory. So if I want to call it up, I just do memory recall. There it is. Okay, so let me clear. Every place that there is a measurement of inches in this direction, that's where I want to know how many stitches that's going to be. So let me start at the bottom. Notice I'm not starting with the rib. The rib, I'm going to use the same number of stitches for the rib as I do for the body for this child sweater. I'm just going to go down a needle size. So I have 11 inches times memory recall, which brings up my 4.28, is equal to 47 stitches. So I'm going to write 47 right down here. Then I'm going to clear it. And actually, that's an odd number. I do want an odd number for my 1 by 1 rib, and I'll show you why later. It has to do with how we're going to seam it together. But I want to add actually 2 stitches. I want to add a stitch at either edge for the seam, so that I'll do a full mattress stitch. See, already I told you to use a pencil. You can see why I use a pencil. So I'm actually going to use 49. I'm at 47 stitches for the full width, plus a stitch at either end for the seams. At the risk of stating the obvious, if you start with 49 stitches here, you have to account for 49 stitches up here. You have to have some in each shoulder and some in the back of the neck. This is the back, and then this is the front. Because they're the same size, we just draw them all in one place. So let's try the back of the neck. And the back of the neck has to be an odd number because this is an odd number. Because we want these 2 shoulders to be equal, which means you have to take that extra odd number and stick it in there. So get my calculator, and that's 4.5. If you look at your pattern, you see it's 4.5 inches times the number of stitches per inch, which is in our memory recall, is equal to 19.26. Well, that's perfect. We're going to put 19 stitches in the back of the neck. Okay, 49 minus 19, because we started with 49, and we put 19 up there. This is going to be nice and easy. Minus 19 is equal to 30. So we have 30 stitches left over. Why don't we put 15 in this shoulder and 15 in this shoulder? There we go. That looks pretty good. Now here's a little number that we have to cut out that placket. Let's see what I have. I have it for this size 1 at 1.25 inches. You could make it 1.5 inches. That's a little bit wide perhaps for this size, but I like, you know, it's a kid's sweater, so I like it to be a little bit exaggerated. I like to put big buttons on it because it's irritating as a mother to try to do little buttons as cute as they are, but that's just a personal preference. Okay, so 1.25 inches times memory recall is equal to 5.35. Well, 5 1/3. I think I'm going to put, because it has to be an odd number, right? Just like this had to be an odd number. I'm going to put, oops, all my excitement, I broke my lead there. 5 stitches is going to be the center of my placket. All right, now clearly I could have typed in 4.28 every time I wanted to do this. You don't have to use your memory in your calculator. It's just easy, and it also, I really do believe that it cuts down on errors. Okay, let's do the sleeve now. How many stitches do we have at the bottom? We have, this is going to be 6.25 across that cuff times memory recall is equal, and you have to hit this equal sign, don't forget that, 27 stitches. That's good. 27, 28, 29, because again, I'm going to put 1 stitch on either side for a seam allowance. That's kind of a lot, but that's just the seam that we're going to use for this thing. Okay, this one is 10 times memory recall is equal to 42.8, which is 43. And remember, we have those extra 2 stitches on there, so we have 45 stitches up here. So we're going to have to, if we were knitting from the bottom, we would have to increase from 29 to 45. In our case, we're going to from the top down, we're going to go from 45 and decrease to 29. And that is the complete set of numbers that we need for stitches for this little pattern. Now rows is another issue, so what we do is we go to the row, go to memory recall, memory minus or subtract from memory, and now clear. So when I do memory recall this time, nothing comes up, it's just 0. And notice that little M is gone from there. Now if I want to put my rows per inch in here, I can. And because my rows per inch did not change after I washed my swatch, I don't have to do this. However, for those of you who had your row gauge change after you washed it, then you need to use this gauge or this row gauge. So I'm going to add this now into my memory. My row gauge is 6.15 rows per inch. 6.15. Add it to memory. There's my little M, tells me, okay, so we're not going to count this rib. We're just going to count this 5.5 inches, and then there's 5 inches. 5.5 times memory recall is equal to 34 rows. So this will be 34 rows. 5 times memory recall is equal to 31 rows. Okay, so the whole length above this 1.5 inches for the rib is going to be 65 rows probably. This is where it becomes more critical, is in your sleeve, because we're going to be doing decreases and we need to know how many rows are in there so that we can evenly space our decreases all the way down. So let's do 5.5 inches. They just have such short little arms. 5.5 times memory recall is equal to, again, 34 rows plus our rib. There we have it. Those are the, oh, here's something else we need to know. Now, in this case, we have 5.5 inches from the very bottom to where we bind off for the front placket. And in this case, you've got 1.5 inches there. So we only need 4 inches to get that total of 5.5. So 4 times memory recall is equal to 25 rows. So this will be 25 body rows before we bind off for the placket, and that's just on the front. All right, we are in very good shape to begin casting on. So go ahead and fill out your pattern by putting your stitch and row numbers based on your gauge onto this pattern. Start with an odd number of stitches for your ribbing. You can increase or decrease to make an even number of stitches if you need to in the body, but for the rib itself, I want you to have an odd number because it makes for an easier seam, or the seam that I'm going to show you. The same is true over here. Don't forget to add those extra stitches for your seams, and when you come back, we're going to start knitting the back.